intensity. The New World Order. Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to tonight's live edition. It is November 9th, 2012. This is the Friday edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. Tonight I'm joined by my good friend, fellow radio show host, investigator. I could go on. The list is very long. Filmmaker, yada, yada, yada. Mr. Steve Starr. Steve, welcome back.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It's been a long week, and there's a lot of news out there, and we're going to get to it. So it's going to be a great show here, Pop. I hope we get John on with us again, and
Yes, John Hankey will be coming on with us and joining us after the first break at the 10:30 mark. He'll be coming back on with us and sitting in. He's, in fact, I was just talking to him before we came on air, and it was news to him about the whole Petraeus thing, which, Steve, we're going to go over. That's kind of interesting, to say the least, I would say.
Oh, yeah, it certainly is. He claims he's leaving because he had an extramarital affair. But we also know that he's supposed to testify on the Benghazi incident in 5 days. So there's some things going on. Of course, you saw the news about Holder as well, suggesting nothing official yet that he may be leaving as Attorney General. Hillary's planning on leaving sometime. So there are a lot of people changing in this new Obama administration already, and it's not even a week old.
You think she's going to go work for the World Bank?
That or the UN, possibly. It's hard to say where she'll end up. Maybe she'll take a little time off and never come back. Who knows? But
Hillary's like herpes. She always comes back.
That's a good one for a very
she
long
flares up. You have a flare-up of Hillary again.
Yes. So she never comes back. You can, it's like herpes at Hancock High. You can never lose them, right? And
That's horrible. And she is. I'm going to tell you what. I don't care. I know there's a lot of women out there that think, "Oh, she's so great." She stood by her man. That was a friggin' act.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was such an act. It was done for political stance and posturing and to gain power from it, which she did. This woman is evil. And I'm not saying all women in politics are evil. That's a stupid, straw man argument if someone tried throwing that out there. What I'm saying is Hillary Clinton as an individual is evil. Plain and simple. You look up her past, you look up the things she's done, evil.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting, too. I don't know if you saw Michelle Obama's acceptance speech dress. I don't want to get into fashion, but she still has that same black and red motif. The first time she looked like
Black Widow look?
Yeah, the Black Widow. She had the red hourglass. And this other time, I guess it was the Wednesday morning after the election, she had this black dress on that looked like it had blood or spaghetti spilled all down the front. I mean, I don't know where she gets her fashions or ideas, but there's something esoteric, I think, about this whole motif that is very strange. But that's another story. We'll leave that for the...
I just thought of something. 4 more years of her spending, money on credit cards that the taxpayers pay for. Oy. Yeah, she spends a ton of money, dude. Like, that woman likes to shop.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I like how they tell people that the American people need to scrimp and save. You have to tighten the belt. Things are rough right now, and if we're going to get through this time, blah 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 blah. Meanwhile, they're going on lavish vacations, but they swear that it's their own personal money. Really? The president only makes like what, $220,000 or $250,000?
Yeah, I think they might have bumped him up to $450,000, but it's still very it's pittance compared to the amount of
spend $1 million on a vacation. How does that work?
Yeah, like she ran a big credit card, I guess. You know
what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And I don't want to hear where they have an American Express black card, Popeye. Okay, whatever. So speaking of Petraeus, let's get into Petraeus and this the whole. I don't think anybody realizes this, or maybe not many people realize, but the former General David Petraeus, who is now was the head of CIA, he stepped down. He resigned, and they're saying, and this is the official. This is from him in a letter to the president. Now, who knows if this is the real reason? I don't think so, but it says in a letter from him to the president, it's because of an extramarital affair. What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I want to play an audio. I want to play some audio for you. It's from a video. I want to play an audio clip, and it's when they were announcing it on Fox today. And I don't remember the name of the reporter. You'll hear her mentioned, but her and this, I don't know, anchor, whatever the frig you want to call the guy that was speaking, and they're chatting, and he's like, well, this just in, it's, I'm getting reports, it's confirmed, yes, it's confirmed, he had an extramarital affair, and that is the reason. And it's like, how did you confirm it? He claimed this just came out, and you're telling me you confirmed it? What, did you travel in time into the future? That was fast. And she keeps saying to him, no, I think it's got something to do with Benghazi. So let me play the audio clip really quick. This is what I showed you earlier, Stephen. It just goes to show, I'm not saying Fox News tells the truth or anything. It's just very interesting because you can see that the anchor, maybe the anchor and the reporter weren't on the same page. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's happened before, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm, because she's like, no, this is what's going on. He's like, no. Here, listen, check it out.
Well, I want to get to our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Harrigan. Catherine, you were among the first to put into our urgent queue that David Petraeus has, in fact, submitted his resignation letter. And what have you learned since then, Catherine?
Well, what I've been able to learn, Trace, is that there was a chain of events this week. I was told that there was a major meeting that was set up at the CIA for Thursday of this week. It did involve bringing some principals in from out of town, and that the meeting was canceled at short notice. By the way, I have to interrupt. The chain of events would be Romney not getting in, because remember, if anybody remembers and you look into this, there were connections to Romney and Benghazi and who really pulled things off and blah, 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 and Obama's being blamed. So you got one has to just wonder, and then I'll shut up and let it play, but one just has to wonder if Petraeus is like, I'm out of here because this guy got reelected. Peace. She said there were a bunch of things that happened this week. Yeah, like the election, perhaps. Because Director Petraeus had to take a meeting with the president. Now, what would be a standard operating procedure here is that his deputy would take that kind of meeting, but I was told the issue was such that it could only be taken by the CIA director. What I just learned from an intelligence official a short time ago is that it was on Thursday that the CIA director asked the president if he could submit his letter of resignation for personal reasons. I was not told anything more than that. And then today, that letter was accepted by the president. While the request was for personal reasons, I think we need to lay out a couple of things that have happened just in the last few weeks alone. I was also told today that there was considerable angst about a briefing that was given by the CIA last week, which laid out their timeline or their version of events of what unfolded in Benghazi, and specifically the emergency response in Benghazi.
Oh, what? Did they just mention Benghazi, Steve? Did I hear that right?
Yes, it sounds like a Jane Stanley moment here, doesn't it? Yeah, there was a leak of some information that they're going to have to do some damage control, of course, but I don't buy the whole story of that one extramarital affair. I mean, this man was in Afghanistan for many years. I mean, don't spies have sex a lot? You know, I mean, I'm tempted to sing the James Bond theme.
First of all, look, let's be honest. Any woman who marries a guy who spends that much time away from home, regardless of what he's doing, probably accepts the fact inside that it might happen. She just doesn't deal with it, talk about it, whatever, put it in, you know what I mean? So, come on. Like, really? How many of these government guys have sex with little boys and they don't resign from their jobs? So why is having an extramarital affair, which nobody knew about until he came out and said it, well, how is that affecting his job as the head of the CIA? Well, it could violate security, Popeye. No, bullshit. It can violate security. All right, here's the rest of the clip.
See, I was told, was it possible that the White House did not sanction that and the White House did not approve of that timeline because it in effect said what happened there was not our problem, it was someone else's problem. The other thing to consider, as we first reported here at Fox, is that there really was a disconnect between what lawmakers saw as the raw intelligence about Benghazi, which pointed towards a terrorist attack, and the briefings they received from the CIA director within days of that attack. If you can just stay with me, let me lay that out for you. Just a couple of days after the attack on 9/11, I was able to confirm that the FBI and the National Counterterrorism Center were briefing to lawmakers that the evidence supported, and these were telephone intercepts, that it was an al-Qaeda or an al-Qaeda-related event. And then the following day, the CIA director went up to Capitol Hill and briefed that it really did seem to be a demonstration that had spun out of control like a flash mob, and that the origination was this anti-Islam video. This disconnect really upset lawmakers who felt that there was other intelligence that pointed to a terrorist attack, though General Petraeus seemed to downplay that in his briefing. In addition, I'm told that the attack in Benghazi not only created concern about the murder of the ambassador and those 3 other Americans, but it also created great angst about the exposure of the depth and breadth of the CIA operation in Benghazi, which is largely an operation that is focused on getting these Stinger missiles off the battlefield, if you will, in Libya and out of the hands of extremists. So
now, remember what I said, by the way, when this whole Benghazi thing went down. Go back and look at the older shows when it went down from, a couple weeks ago or a month ago, whenever the hell it was, 2 months ago now. Go look and listen to the shows. And as I'm talking, okay, I said one of the SEALs was there tracking weapons. He wasn't there in a capacity of just being your standard bodyguard. One of those guys was there tracking weapons. So there's more to this story than we're being told. She just confirmed the same thing. That a lot of the boots on the ground there, those guys were tracking Stinger missiles. So we have boots on the ground in Libya right now. Does that not define boots on the ground in Libya?
Yes, it does. Uh-huh.
Whether they're working for the State Department as former SEALs or if they're currently working as SEALs. I mean, a lot of the times they like to use contractors. Guys that are ex-special forces and stuff and that are now contractors, because when contractors get killed, unless it's a public thing like this, they usually don't count in the numbers, in the total tally. But I'll let it play a little bit more so you can hear it, because the guy starts to argue with her, and this is where he says, no, it's confirmed. He was having an extramarital affair. Pay no attention to Benghazi.
Again, what we know right now is that he asked to be released for personal reasons. We need to take that at face value until we know otherwise. But you have to see that statement in the context of those 3 factors I've just laid out. And I just want to close by reading the section of the statement that we just had from the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. This is someone who is the nation's top intelligence official and has really worked hand in glove, if you will, with the CIA director. And these are men who have known each other for decades. And the statement reads in part from James Clapper. I have spent more than 5 decades serving our country in uniform and out. And of all the exceptional men and women that I have worked with over the years, I can honestly say that David Petraeus stands out as one of our nation's great patriots. On behalf of the entire intelligence community, I thank Dave for his service, his support, and his continued friendship. And I can also tell you in my conversations this afternoon, while there was the great urgency about the news that the CIA director had resigned, you also had that sense of sadness. This is someone who has dedicated 30, 40 years of his life to service, not only in the military, but now to the U.S. intelligence community, Trace.
And Catherine, let me, if I just can jump in here for a second here. We had heard speculation that he may have resigned for personal reasons, and one of those reasons we were getting word of was the possibility of an extramarital affair. Well, we now have confirmed this because a letter has now been submitted by David Petraeus himself. And if you would, Catherine, stand by. Ed Henry, stand by. I'll get comments from you afterward. But let me just read the letter in its entirety. It says, and I'm quoting here, the following message was released to the CIA workforce this afternoon. It says, yesterday afternoon, this is from David Petraeus, I went to the White House and asked the president to be allowed for personal reasons to resign from my position as CIA director. After being married for over 37 years, I showed extremely poor judgment by engaging in an extramarital affair. Such behavior is unacceptable, both as a husband and as the leader of an organization such as ours. This afternoon, the president graciously accepted my resignation. As I depart Langley, I want you to know that it has been the greatest of privileges to have served with you, the officers of our nation's silent service, a workforce that is truly exceptional in every regard. Indeed, you did extraordinary work on a host of critical missions during my time as director, and I am deeply grateful to you for that. Teddy Roosevelt once observed that life's greatest gift is the opportunity to work hard at work worth doing. I will always treasure my opportunity to have done that with you, and I will always regret the circumstances that brought the work to you to an end. Thank you for your extraordinary service to our country and best wishes for continued success in important endeavors that lie ahead for our country and for our agency. It is signed with admiration and appreciation, David H. Petraeus. And Catherine, back to you quickly if I can. So it now has been confirmed that General Petraeus did have an extramarital affair. That's why he's resigning. It's rare, Catherine, a lot of things that we have seen for someone to...
You see how he wraps it up in a nice little bow, and I'll end it there because there's like another minute and a half of it. But you can see how he's like, and that's why he's resigning. So it has nothing to do with Benghazi. Her whole 4.5-minute report before he started talking about this means nothing. Nothing. Connections to Benghazi, they knew more than they're letting on? No, none of that. Nothing. Nothing. You can't know any of that. And by the way, if anybody gets blamed, it won't be Obama, regardless of whether or not it's true. He was in the room, the Oval Office, or wherever the hell he was sitting, supposedly watching it on a video feed from a Predator drone. Even if whether or not that's true or not, he won't fall on the hand grenade or the sword for this. He's the president, and it should fall on him, but it won't. It'll go on Clinton, Holder, and Petraeus. Those will be the three. And look, he's leaving. So you got to wonder, why is he conveniently leaving, Steve? Come on. I mean, for real. Do you buy this at all?
No, I don't. I think the story is absolutely absurd because, as we said before, these kinds of things happen all the time. This is a personal affair between him and his wife. It shouldn't affect his work. You know, I mean, if he's going to say that he's really upset because his wife is upset and he can't run this silent service, as he calls it, which is the initials are SS. And if you want to think about that, I mean, when you talk about what's happening in Gitmo, when you talk about the entire international spy and intelligence community, which was mentioned so much in that story, Popeye. I mean, you're not talking about an extramarital affair being anything but trivia at this point. Look at Gitmo. Look at the trials going on down there. Look at all the ops going on, boots on the ground in Libya, in Syria, all across the Arab Spring revolts. I mean, and everything falling apart here in the country. No, I don't buy it at all. I think it has absolutely, very likely, I think you might have touched on something very important there. The reality is Petraeus might have been looking for Romney to come in. They were going to shuffle the deck, move things around, kind of blow it off, and this thing in Benghazi is another one of those lax moments.
Well, that's what I meant about the whole thing when I said the election happened, and that's why he's bailing out. Punch out, Maverick, eject. Because I maybe he was part of that contingent inside the CIA that Webster Tarpley was talking about, and that Susan Lindauer talked about. It was talked about in Romney Exposed, John Hankey's film, that the CIA, and people can believe it or not, but the CIA and Mossad working together to pull that little attack off, that event, we'll say, off. Who's to say now it suddenly didn't backfire, and everybody responsible for it is like, oh crap. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to get thrown under the bus. So if he leaves now, like I asked you, can he be charged in any capacity, like going to prison or anything, if he's no longer a government official? Can he be charged?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there is, a violation of U.S. American law or anything like that, they can take him to court. I don't think they're going to. I think he's going to skip out the back door before anything happens and before the real stuff hits the fan, and this whole thing starts to come apart because, we're in a lot of trouble right at the moment. I don't know if you noticed this or not, but there were 45 major corporation layoffs that took place in 48 hours after the election. Now, this was all delayed until after the election. That's what sent the Dow Jones down over, 430 points, something like that in the last couple of days. I mean, it's all here. It's coming unraveled. And, Holder, I sent you a link about that. Eric Holder is hinting at his resignation as well now, too. So it looks like a lot of these people are trying to get off the Titanic before it goes down because there's a lot of trouble brewing right on the surface. And, of course, every administration does make changes in the interim, between first and second half, if you like, in football terms, Popeye. But I think you're right. I think the whole thing with Benghazi is a little too much for anybody like Petraeus to want to have to endure, especially after what he's been through in the last, 2.5 to 3 years coming out of Afghanistan into the CIA and into this hotbed.
And dude, all I'll say is this, going to break. All I'll say is this, Steve. If people don't think that the head of the CIA is capable of coming up with a cover story as to why he's quitting, hello, he's the head of the CIA. Any questions? you know what I'm saying? Like, think about that for a second. Right. This guy's, they know how to lie. So I don't buy it. It's shady. It doesn't smell right. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We come back. We should have John Hankey with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. And I am now joined by filmmaker and recent guest to the broadcast, and he's also been over on the Freedom Link a few times, John Hankey. John, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So during the break, we were chatting about Petraeus leaving and quitting as head of the CIA because this is all like fresh news. And I wanted to get your take on it. And what I had said going into the break, because I know that you weren't on the line with us yet, so I'll just tell you what I said on air really quick. I kind of look at it like he's leaving, and I don't know anything. I don't want to speculate too much because I don't know too much yet. But it looks like it's got connections to Benghazi, and whether he's going to get thrown under the bus or whatever. But I wonder, and this is what I said, I wonder if he was involved with helping that whole thing about, like, you had showed how Mitt Romney was connected to it in your movie, Romney Exposed. And I wonder if he was part of that group that was trying to, maybe help make Obama look bad, whatever, go after him, whatever the multiple reasons, the way they would get all the advantages of it. But now that Obama got back in, he's going, uh-oh, Like, I think there was, it looks almost like there's this core group of people that really thought Romney was going to get in as president, so that they were working behind the scenes to facilitate that, and it didn't happen. And it's like,
and hanging out
crap.
a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Exposing themselves, taking risks that they might not have taken had they thought that they'd be facing Obama.
Exactly.
That's, Jesus, you know, my hat's off to you. That's deep. I like that. That's so plausible. That is so utterly plausible. Well, right. I mean, and just to tell the people on air, or to the people listening, that is to say that, you know, you asked me, and the first thing out of my mouth was Benghazi. That perhaps he was involved in Benghazi, and that would have been the reason that he would have been getting the boot. He's a. I'm trying to figure out what I want to say first. What I want to say first is to all of your listeners that they should go to Netflix and find Dark Legacy, which is my video on Bush's involvement in the Kennedy assassination, and watch it on Netflix for free, because it will help boost my credibility with Netflix when I try to get the next one on. But anyhow, you asked me, and I said Benghazi, and there's I wrote an article that I think is up at Rents, jeffrents.com, about, it's called Barack and the Crosshairs, and I make a comparison between Obama and Kennedy. And Kennedy was not a very popular guy with a whole lot of people when he was certainly the day before he was murdered, right? The things that he did in Vietnam, right? He sent 15,000 troops, and he called them advisors. And, you know, it's important that he called them advisors, but they were troops, and a lot of them got killed. And he ran, I could go on, and I won't. If you want to look for bad things to say about Kennedy along those lines, you can find them. And certainly Fidel Castro and anybody who was remotely sympathetic to the right of self-determination of any small country, they were all very offended by what happened at the Bay of Pigs. And so, you know, if you want to point fingers and find bad things about anybody, you can probably find at least as much stuff about Kennedy as you can about Obama. And, you know, if and when Obama gets assassinated, then people will look back nostalgically upon him. But I said all of that to say that when Kennedy came in, he inherited a rabid, I mean, these guys were nuts, anti-communist military, you know, frothing at the mouth, ready to have a nuclear holocaust and deem it a success if the U.S. only suffered 40 million casualties if Russia was exterminated. And it was Kennedy's encounters with those individuals that very, very largely changed him and his attitude towards the military and the military-industrial complex, and certainly in his attitude towards the advice that he was getting from the military, and it vastly changed his attitude towards that advice and to what extent he should be paying any attention to it whatsoever. And so rather early in his administration, he started ignoring everything that the military advised him to do, which was none of us probably would be here if he hadn't, because the Bay of Pigs would have turned into a nuclear exchange, a major nuclear exchange between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. When Obama came in, he inherited a similarly rabid military. You know, people who said we shouldn't be making war on terrorists, we should be making war on Islam. Right? That's that line of thinking. And, you know, he had to deal with them. He couldn't fire them all right off the bat, and he didn't. Kennedy didn't, and he ended up getting murdered by them. A lot of people that I consider very knowledgeable looked at what happened in Colombia and the firing of all of those Secret Service people and said they caught them planning an assassination, and that's what's going on, and that's why they all got fired. And, you know, that's plausible, right? That it's at least plausible, and it might be considerably more than that. But the notion that you were just describing, certainly Petraeus, beyond any shadow of a doubt, is a very, very rabid, and he's very much a hanger-on. That is to say, he's very much completely going right. I mean, he hates Obama. He hates everything that Obama stands for, and he always has. And it's interesting that they waited 4 years and that now they're giving him the boot. And, you know, it's utterly plausible that that's just the natural course of things, except that why now? Why not 2 weeks ago? Why not a month ago? The timing of it seems a little bit strange. When, in any case, somebody is not going to, thrown under the bus, I don't think is the right term. I mean, I think that the evidence in my video, Romney Exposed, nails the Romney campaign for being responsible for the attacks in Libya. And just, you know, to briefly review, to me, the most striking feature of that whole scenario, besides the fact that Romney's response came 2 minutes after the announcement from Hillary Clinton about the attacks, and, you know, how are you prepared 2 minutes later unless you had planned it, you knew it was coming, and you had done everything that you had to do in order to prepare yourself for it. But the other thing about it is it took place on 9/11. And 9/11 is a date that holds special meaning for Henry Kissinger and, you know, that cabal of, you know, really, really, really dark, vicious, murderous, horrible thugs. But it doesn't hold any meaning for anybody in the Arab world, in the Muslim world. So if the attacks took place in Libya, as they did on 9/11, well, I mean, that, to someone with the proper perspective and a little bit of knowledge and background, that's a bright red signature of PNAC, right? The Project for a New American Century, the real authors of the 9/11 attacks, and points very, very dramatically away from any possibility that it was anything else. Anyhow, so that happened, and somebody was involved in it, right? I mean, if the Romney campaign did it, somebody had to be in there. Somebody had to contact that militia, the militia that carried out the attacks, and say, okay, boys, this is when and where and what, and, you know, here's you know, a package of $10,000 bills for each of you, or, you know, whatever it was that they got paid to carry out these attacks. Somebody had to have been the person who did that, and who more likely than Petraeus. Let me come back in a week and see if I can find somebody, but, you know, I didn't even know that Petraeus had resigned when you called me. I learned from you a few minutes ago. But
well, let me ask a question, John and Popeye, real quick here. You know, what we're kind of hitting at here was, I think, a central question about, was Romney the guy that was picked to take over here, and did something not quite work out for the New World Order elite in the election?
Well, was John right? Because he called it. He said, you know, and I have to genuinely ask this. You know, was he correct, Steve, when he said that it was going to be, it might end up being, you know, this behind the scenes rough and tumble fight, and somebody might not want to give up? You know what I'm saying?
Right, exactly. And it seems to me like...
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Well, what we were talking about last week, this is almost a deja vu. We touched upon the fact that we thought that there was a Romney connection to the Benghazi attack that may have been completely unknown. We mentioned, you know, that Kennedy was killed by the CIA. Obviously, these guys are a rogue agency when they want to be, and they don't always keep the president in the loop. And your point that you made, John, that 2 minutes after the announcement from Hillary Clinton, a prepared statement was issued by the Romney campaign, which is pretty indicting in terms of being prepared and knowing what was going on here. So as you suggested, Petraeus is a leftover kind of from the old Bush years. He might have been one of those people who was looking for the new administration to come in, party to possibly some of the things that might be used to re-enhance the involvement in Libya, and blame that on the prior administration, as they like to do. And all of a sudden, things are different. So are we in a mixture now?
Well, where fighting, basically, that there's this, you know, the fighting behind the scenes. And you had alluded to last week that Obama was, I guess, I think you called him like a scrapper or something to that effect. And
I think I called him a thug.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's what it was. And that he might, you know, that there, you know, he might not, you know, obviously he's not going to sit down and just take this. So Is that what we just witnessed? Did we actually just witness what you had talked about last week? That's what I was wondering. I think that's what Steve was getting at, too.
Yeah, exactly the point, yeah.
Well, see, I think that John Kerry was an operative, and that his job was to concede in spite of this overwhelming evidence. And I think, I said that last time, and I think that Al Gore was a naive babe in the woods, and that he got caught off guard, and he wasn't expecting this. And I think that, stealing elections, Chicago has been a stronghold of that over the last the last 100 years or so, right? And Chicago's infamous, and that's Obama's background. And I think that, I haven't read any studies about it, and last time I also referenced people. There was a Rolling Stone article by Robert Kennedy Jr. in which he details just the incredible amount of evidence showing that the 2004 election was stolen from Kerry. And I'm rather more than sure that Obama was familiar with all of that stuff, and that they were as ready as possible. Well,
did we lose him?
Uh-oh, we might have lost him.
We might have lost him there.
Yeah, I can reconnect him. Yeah, we lost him. Hold on, I'll reconnect him.
Go ahead, and I'll just kind of fill in the blanks. I think what we were talking about, though, the same point being along the lines was, is there infighting among the New World Order elite as to what they really wanted to do? Were they backing Romney? Did something go wrong?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was obviously some sort of backing. So is it like a Sopranos thing? Is it a...
Sure.
And I use that as the mob reference when I say that, by the way. Like the Genovese versus the Gambinos. Are they warring against each other right now? Is that what we just witnessed? And, because that's what my take is. And I could be wrong, but it's like Petraeus he was part of this crew that thought Romney was going to get in, and he'd be, you know what I mean? Whether he was an insider, whether he sold out, for whatever reason, he was on the team.
Right.
And now that Obama got in, he's like, uh-oh. And he went home and said, honey, be prepared. I'm going to come out with a story that says I cheated on you, but I didn't, baby. I love you.
Yeah, whether he did or not, I mean, it's
kind of irrelevant.
It's something like a football coach might do. You know what I mean? Or the dean of a philosophy school, but not a CIA head. Yeah.
Well, no, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm going to try to bring John back in here while we chat.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's all right, John. It happens. Live radio. It's good. No, don't worry.
Well, so the other thing so there was a Republican operative who got caught throwing Democratic voter registration forms in the garbage. Did we talk about this last week? And he's sitting in jail right now.
Did you see the video? Somebody had sent it to CBS about somebody was voting for, and I have to admit, I mean, this was where they voted for Obama, and they pressed Barack Obama, and the check mark popped up on Romney's name. I was like,
I heard about it. I didn't see the video, but right. So there was that going on, and they got busted. But this guy, it was something that they did they did widespread in 2004, which is they got Democratic registrations and they threw them in the garbage. Well, this guy got caught. Well, how did he get caught? Well, some guy was looking out the window and saw somebody throwing stuff into the garbage, and that made him suspicious. I mean, the first time I heard that story, I'm kind of slow, and it didn't strike me. And the more often I hear myself repeat it, the more, I mean, that's ridiculous. They were following this guy, right? They were watching. They were ready. And I think that they sent a message to the Republican operatives: you guys are going to be in prison on Wednesday morning if you try to do this. I think they were all over them. I think that they were on it. And, it's much easier to kill an innocent person than it is to kill a murderer, right? Because murderers, they suspect, right? They suspect that people are like them, and they take precautions against people who are like themselves, whereas innocent people tend to suspect that everybody's like them, and they don't take precautions, right? And they're not prepared. And I think that Obama is not an innocent babe in the woods, and I think that he was prepared, and I think that they got them. But I think there's something else in play, and we're sitting here trying to read the tea leaves, and nobody should put too much credence in anything that any of us say, and especially ourselves, I think. But one thing that we haven't mentioned, and I think is very much worth mentioning, is the fact that And I haven't seen anybody talking about this. How is it that Obama got 330, I think is the number, electoral college votes, and he lost the Congress? How did that happen?
Well, I think that's pretty easy to understand, though, John, because, what you're looking at is that Obama had a brilliant strategy. As a matter of fact, I did some tallying about this before we got on the air because I wanted to look at this. There were actually 9 million less voters in this election than there were in 2008. And surprisingly, they came out of the Obama camp because, see, in 2008, he got 69,456,000. He only got 61,586,000 compared to 59 million in this election, or in 2008 for McCain and 58 million for Romney. So Romney lost 1 million out of the total. Now there's more votes coming in because 2012 is still adding with absentees and all that. But the point is simply this, that about 9 million people who voted in 2008 did not vote in 2012. Wow. And oddly enough, in spite of all of that, Obama, who has a lot of people in the inner cities of like our state, Colorado. Okay, I live out here in Weld County, which is a very conservative Republican county, but our state went for Obama, just narrowly, of course. But just like, as a matter of fact, the map looks very similar between the wins in 2008 for Obama and 2012, except for Romney picked up West Virginia and another state. Florida is still under decision, but it won't affect the outcome. The point I was just simply making, though, is you saw this huge growth of Congress representatives from the Republicans picking up very high, because you're dealing with a lot of rural areas, whereas in the cities in the states and the very high populous regions like in Colorado, which control the electoral vote, the Democrats picked up more senators. They got 54 now. So it's a very interesting situation the way this whole thing went, but a lot of Obama voters did not turn out for this election, and yet he still won.
8 million of them.
Yeah, at least 8 million.
Well, it goes to show you the GOP pissed off the Ron Paul followers and the Ron Paul voters.
Yeah.
Well, that was my call, but as I'm listening to this number, it sounds like they only pissed off 1 million of them.
Yeah, actually.
Very true.
Yeah. Actually, it's surprising that, even if you add all the third parties together and gave them to Romney, which he wouldn't get all the votes, but even if you added that to it, it would barely make any difference. And in spite of Obama losing 8 million voters, he still managed to pull this one out, and even pretty heavily, really, when you consider the numbers of these states. As you predicted, Wisconsin was a pivotal point, John, and that was really where it kind of put it over. But, you're seeing he's a tough little, scruffy little thug, and I think they had this thing pretty well figured out with the numbers the way they did. There's some other shady stuff that we could go into. But the point that I'm wanting to get back to is I'm still looking at the Gambinos and Carlucci's scenario. I mean, I think that they weren't planning on Obama being reelected. I mean, Romney was boasting that he had his acceptance speech already written. They were, the hurricane, of course, was going to affect things. Again, Dade and Broward County, they're still counting the votes there. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. But, I wonder whether something went wrong with the big plan. Not that Obama isn't a standby, but I think they were planning to get rid of Obama. And the neocons, as you pointed out last week, John, we were talking about this, wanted to incite more war. They wanted to put Romney in. They wanted to continue with this American independence energy program, which would basically break the backs of the Arab oil cartels everywhere but Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, of course. And the Arab Spring situation was to go on. They could blame this mishap on Obama, and something turned the tables on them. And I think it was the fact that even though they calculated they were going to get Romney in, they miscalculated, and now we've got a salad bowl being tossed. That's my question. And my outlook is kind of along those lines. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by salad bowl being tossed, but, I think that this Petraeus stuff is very, very, very interesting. I haven't said this, and it's boiling in the back of my mind, and I got to spit it out. I think the evidence that the Gabriel Gifford shooting, that the guy who just got sentenced today, Loeffner, that he's a Manchurian candidate. I think the evidence for that is overwhelming. I find it more than persuasive. And if he's a Manchurian candidate, what was the point? And I don't really want to go too far down this road, but I said that I suspected that Romney was involved in that shooting, and that it was him making his bone. Well, I guess here we go. That George H.W. Bush was involved up to his eyebrows in the Kennedy assassination, and there's this evidence that he was not only on the scene, but that he was arrested coming out of one of the buildings as a shooter, out of the Daltex building as a shooter. And in investigating that, I found this quote from a very reliable source saying that he was quoting Prescott Bush as saying that George needed to get his hands dirty, that he expected everything to be handed to him, and he needed to get his hands dirty. And I think that these guys are a mafia in every way, shape, and form. And in the mafia, if you want to sit down at the table with the big boys, you have to make your bone, right? If you want to be involved in the big stuff, you have to commit a murder. And that's
good point. John, I'm going to cut you off because we got a break sneaking up on us.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. Tonight, I am joined by my good friend, filmmaker Steve Stars. Steve, say hello.
Hey, it's good to be here with you, Popeye, again, and we have a great show going. John Hankey is back with us. We're talking about some of the things that we had talked about just a week ago prior to the election, and deja vu, if there haven't been some connections already made from that show. We mentioned what was going to happen here. We knew that Romney was an insider. I mean, that was what a lot of people didn't know. And even people like Joel Skousen, who said he was, just kind of a Mormon, hick in a sense, who made a lot of money. But no, obviously he's been involved with the Bushes and going way back to Monsanto, back to Bibi Netanyahu right out of college. And so now all of a sudden we're asking this question, was he the pick? Was he the person that was supposed to go in? And right before the break, John was mentioning that you have to earn your red badge of murder, in other words, or your bone, in order to go up in the echelons of this system. And I think we're going to come back to that point, and I'll just, if you want me to, Pop, I will just ask, John, what about this making your bone or earning your bone or getting your promotion by committing some sort of a murder? And was Romney involved with any of that kind of stuff?
Well, it's I think, really brilliantly common sense that if you and I are involved in a criminal enterprise and we want to bring in a partner, and we want to know that we can trust this guy, that he's not going to rat us out, well, how do you do that? And I think that's no doubt a time-worn custom that, God knows, it might go back thousands of years, and it probably does, that you have this person commit a similar crime to the kind of crimes that you have been committing, and you have him do it in front of you, or at least in a means and way that you can then pin it to him, so that you know that he can't rat you out for the crimes that you guys are now planning to commit, because you can pin a murder on him. And I know that the LA street gangs do that. I was surprised to learn, but I mean, that was sort of my introduction to the whole topic, and then discovered that, in fact, that's the way the mafia does it. And then you have George H.W. Bush, who has his involvement in the Kennedy assassination, and his political career starts on November 23rd, right? The day after the assassination, he begins running for Senate in Texas. And loses and loses and loses and loses, and every time he loses, they pick him up and dust him off and set him on the top of the pile. When I was looking for a motive in the murder of John Kennedy Jr., I couldn't find one. He was, this was a guy who was so sweet and so good, and not interested in getting involved in politics. So who would decide to kill him? And it just struck me one morning, early in the morning, that perhaps this was the father killed the father and the son killed the son, and I run to my computer to find out where George H.W. Bush is, and he doesn't have an alibi. He's missing in action. Karen Hughes, his campaign manager, said the reporters ranted to get his response to the death of John Kennedy Jr., and she told the reporter she didn't know where he was and she didn't know when he would be back. And he's running for president. It's just astonishing that she would make a remark like that. Well, when I mentioned that Loeffner was Gerald Loeffner, the guy who shot Gabby Giffords, was obviously a Manchurian candidate, so there's something very, very fishy. There's a number of very, very fishy things about it, and there's an article that, it's harder to find on the internet. Anyhow, I apologize for that. But the point is, Romney doesn't have an alibi. He supposedly got on a plane to fly to the United Arab Emirates. He's exactly in exactly the same position that Bush was when he disappeared on the weekend that John Kennedy Jr. died. Romney disappears onto an airplane to fly to the United Arab Emirates. He's running for president. He's losing, and he's courting what sector of the population is he courting? Whose vote is he planning to get by going and cozying up to these Muslim monarchs in the United Arab Emirates? And then he went to visit Petraeus, or at least that's what he says. That's his alibi for where he was the weekend that Gabby Giffords was murdered. I'm sorry, shot through the head. So we have this very, very strange connection between this very, very, very dark guy, Romney, and Petraeus. And now, the minute after Obama wins election, Petraeus finds himself with a boot in his butt. And Steve was saying, and I find this really, really powerful, that he's connecting that they were planning, that Petraeus went out on a limb, perhaps, and did some things that he wouldn't have done if he felt like Obama was going to be president, was going to win the election, because he figured that, you can commit any crime you want on November 6th. If Romney is president, then you're off scot-free. You're right. He's going to get your back. He's going to protect you and make sure that nothing ill comes your way. And it seems to me utterly plausible that Petraeus was in a similar situation. I mentioned that Henry Kissinger was in Paris committing all sorts of felonies, sabotaging Johnson's attempts to make peace, and would have gone to prison if Hubert Humphrey had won the election. But Kissinger went out on a limb, sabotaged Johnson's efforts to make peace and get Humphrey elected. And Nixon was able to win the election and was able to protect Kissinger, in fact, bring him in and make him Secretary of State. George H.W. Bush was in Paris sabotaging Carter's attempts to negotiate the freedom for the hostages in Iran, and doing stuff that, is utterly illegal and might have gone to prison, should have gone to prison, and very likely might have had Carter won. But he went out on a limb figuring that Reagan is going to win, and so he's going to be protected, and he was able to do that, right? He felt confident in going out on a limb, exposing himself to that sort of danger, and it seems to me utterly plausible that Petraeus went out on a limb. Somebody, somewhere, was involved in organizing the details of the attack on the Libyan embassy. Somebody affiliated with the Romney campaign was involved in organizing the details, right? Hiring the people and arranging the timing and paying the salaries and so on for the attack on the Libyan embassy. And I can't imagine who better positioned than Petraeus. He's the head of the CIA, right? He wasn't the head of the CIA when Romney flew to visit him in Afghanistan. He was the head of the war in Afghanistan, but he was the head of the CIA when was he the head of the CIA when Libya fell? If he was the head of the CIA when Libya fell, then, I mean, geez, that puzzle piece gets, much better refined and is much more liable to slip into the place. It makes much more sense, because he would certainly have had the contacts with the militias in Libya if he was the head of the CIA at that time, and I'm rather sure that he was.
Yeah, I think he was. I think that all that transition took place last
it was a year ago, and he's been in. Yeah. Well, wasn't that one of his first acts as head of CIA, was to get involved to help? Okay. With I could be wrong, but I believe that's accurate as well. So that and I don't think it's speculating too much to say that I mean, that's what it looks like. If you sit back and you look at it, you're like, wow, there's people that really thought Romney was going to get in, and when he didn't get in, they were like, oh no, recount, do something, please have a recount.
And he would have been, I mean, just think about it. It's such common sense. He would have been the guy. He's clearly, if Romney is running for president and going to talk to General Petraeus openly, right, and that's his alibi, is that he's flaunting the connection that he has with Petraeus, and then they make Petraeus head of the CIA. Well, if Romney's trying to do something dark and dirty in Libya, who among his associates would be better placed and better connected to go to? So, geez, and
well, yeah, you need an inside guy. I mean, you'd have to have somebody on the inside, right? So now all of a sudden he gets back in, and not even a week later, all of a sudden you have people going, yeah, you know what, I got to quit. And
I'm having this affair, and
right,
I got to quit.
I'd rather character assassinate myself than go through anything else. And one of the other hosts here on the network actually messaged me on Skype and asked me to ask you a question. It was, do you think Petraeus quit in order to be able to plead the fifth when questioned by Congress, as opposed to because he works for the government, he's got to answer certain questions? Well, no, I'm a private citizen and blah 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 blah.
And I can just not pick up the phone, right? I can duck you and dodge you if I'm not working for you anymore. And, my secretary says I'm in a meeting and I don't return your calls. What are you going to do? Absolutely. I mean, that makes an enormous amount of sense to me. I was going to take us down a different rabbit hole if...
Shoot, go ahead.
If you're ready. But it's just to give, people in the audience, I hope, are sitting there with their mouths open going, give me a break, that can't be true. And I just wanted to share something to give people just a flavor of how much you don't know about what's going on. They just released a CIA report on the Bay of Pigs invasion, and I was reading some of it, and it wasn't too terrible. It actually, if you know what you're looking for, you can see the shadows, and you can make out the outlines of the shadows. But the minute that the Bay of Pigs invasion ended, that is to say, the minute that the invaders surrendered, Kennedy called Maxwell Taylor out of retirement and commissioned him to conduct an investigation to see what went wrong. And there's a book called Operation Zapata. It's not easy to find. I think it's like $400, $500 on Amazon, and there's one copy. That's it. But it's at a number of libraries, and if you go to a really first-rate research facility, they'll have it. And in that, they tell you that this is Maxwell Taylor's report, that the CIA, well, there's a number of interesting things, one of which at least ties in with this. They began making the plan for the Bay of Pigs invasion the minute that Kennedy won the election. Now, we have all been told, if you were paying any attention, that the plan was developed under Eisenhower, and it's not true. We've all been told that Nixon was the guy who was in charge of it, and it's absolutely not true. The plan for it didn't begin until Kennedy won the election, and I don't know that we need to... I have an explanation for why that is, and I guess I'll say it because I can say it quickly enough, which is that the CIA had information that Castro was planning to approach Kennedy and try to make peace, and they had to come up with a plan to sabotage that. In any case, let me go on, which is to say that in this Maxwell Taylor report, they say that the CIA approached Kennedy and said that they wanted to have the invasion, as described, as you're familiar with. And Kennedy looked at it and said, no, I will not approve any D-Day style invasion. If you want to have a few boats slip in and, drop these guys off in the dead of the night and have them creep ashore, that's fine, but you're not going to have, bombing the beach, strafing the beach, clearing the beach, and then have, these large troop transports sitting off the shore and bring these guys in the daylight. That's not what's going to happen. So they put it to Kennedy. Kennedy disapproved it, and then they went ahead and did it anyway. Well, they knew they were going to get fired, and I mean, that's another thing that I never hear intelligently discussed, which is to say, they all say, oh, well, Dulles got fired for recommending the Bay of Pigs invasion. Dulles recommended the Bay of Pigs invasion. The plan then went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff approved the invasion. And if you accept the story, which isn't true, that Kennedy approved the invasion, well, if somebody brings a plan to you and you're the executive and you look at it and you hand it over to the military and they look at it and approve it and it comes back to you and you approve it, you don't then fire the people who proposed it in the first place because there's all these other people who approved it up and down the line. You fire people when they're insubordinate. And if they bring you a plan and you disapprove it and they go ahead with the plan anyway, that's when you fire people. Now, they told Kennedy that they had changed the plan. They told Kennedy, yes, we heard you, and it's not going to be a D-Day style invasion. We're going to smuggle the guerrillas in the dead of night. It's going to be a guerrilla operation. And Kennedy, that's what Kennedy approved. That's not what they launched. That is not what the Bay of Pigs invasion was. And then you get this over and over in the Taylor report. In fact, they have one person after the other come in and say, oh, yeah, there was no guerrilla aspect to this invasion whatsoever. Although that is exactly what Kennedy had insisted upon. So, is that enough? Background for people to let them know that you don't know anything accurate. Everything that you've told about the Bay of Pigs invasion virtually was a lie.
I got to ask you a question about the Bay of Pigs.
Sure.
What do you think of? Did you ever read Fletcher Prouty's books?
Sure.
I think it was JFK where he said that it was Kennedy had signed off on it, but Dulles was like that link in between, and that he didn't give it the go-ahead at the last minute, and that's why the planes didn't take off. Do you give that any credence, or do you think that's a little bit misrepresented?
He's telling you what he knows. Right? I'd never say a word of any sort whatsoever against Fletcher Prouty.
No, I know what you mean. So, from his standpoint, he believes that to be accurate and true.
Yes,
I got you.
Yes, and he knows that his planes were on the runway, and he knows that they were ready to take off, and he knows that they were ordered not to. And what he doesn't know is that Kennedy found out. Kennedy was, and poor little Adlai Stevenson is going into the Cubans are at the UN screaming about how they're being bombed. Kennedy and Stevenson didn't know anything about it. And Stevenson goes into the UN and calls the Cubans a bunch of liars. And, the Cubans have dead civilians piled up because the monsters that the CIA got to do this bombing, they went in and they hit a few military targets, and then they went and they bombed housing projects. I mean, these are people who, they were former mafia and former Batista, right? They're real fascists and, real haters of humanity in general, I think. And, they committed these really, war crimes where they're bombing civilian populations on purpose. And so the Cubans are up in arms and they're screaming and they're in the UN saying all of this. And Stevenson goes in and says, oh, that's ridiculous. We're not doing any of that stuff. And I don't believe that Stevenson knew that they were doing any of that stuff. And I don't believe that Kennedy knew that they were doing any of that stuff. It doesn't make any sense. None of that stuff makes any sense. If what you're counting on is a popular uprising in support of your invasion, you don't bomb population centers. What sense does that make? Anyhow, the other place I wanted to go, I mean, we can talk about that some more if you want, but my point is that, you won't read this anywhere, that the Bay of Pigs invasion, Dulles and those guys were brilliant when they overthrew the Mossadegh and installed the Shah in Iran, right? There's no argument about that. They were absolutely brilliant. And they were absolutely brilliant when they overthrew the guy Arbenz in Guatemala, right? They had all of the right connections, and the thing ran like clockwork. They had they paid off the right people in the military, and this and that and the other. They pulled one string and the next, and they kidnapped Arbenz and they took him out of the country, and before he knew any better, right, they told him, we're taking you out of the country for your own safety. And when they got him to where they were going, Arbenz turns around and says, you've taken my country over. And right with Arbenz gone, it was much easier for the military people to go in and install themselves. The point is that it was a complex operation, and it ran like a clockwork. It was very, very well organized. And suddenly, with the Bay of Pigs, they turn into complete and utter morons. And they're planning to have a 12-man invasion force stand up against a 200,000 strong militia. Well, you give me a break, and nobody's that stupid, right? The CIA are not that stupid, and there's all of this in the Taylor report. There's all of this information that the CIA knew from the very, very beginning, that there was absolutely no popular support for what they were doing. And, we could go on and on about why that is. Well, because they represented the mafia and the Batista fascists, and they were hugely unpopular. There's no way to, given that, the Castro Revolution had been not only enormously popular, but it was also enormously effective. They had representatives on every single block. And if you showed up, your face is on the block. There's a block captain who looks at your face and says, hey, I never saw you before. Who are you? And that's it. Every time they sent somebody in, they were that well organized that every time they sent somebody in, they were immediately spotted and immediately arrested, so that they were not able to have any sort of underground network, get any sort of underground network in Cuba. They knew absolutely that there was going to be no popular support for this invasion. So they're sending in 1,200 guys against 200,000 guys. Obviously, they knew that there was no small chance of success, not the slightest chance of success. Then why did they go ahead with it, especially given that they were going ahead with it against Kennedy's orders? And I'm telling you, it worked like a charm. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to provoke, it was supposed to sabotage Castro's efforts to make peace with Kennedy. It was supposed to sabotage Kennedy and Castro's joint, and Khrushchev's joint efforts to turn down the heat on the Cold War. And it drove the Cold War temperature through the roof. It almost, blew up into a nuclear holocaust with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It worked maybe even better than it was supposed to, because I don't know that these guys were planning that what they wanted was, the Cuban Missile Crisis, that they wanted it to go to that extreme. But they certainly wanted to stop Kennedy and Castro from having any sort of friendly exchanges, and they achieved that beyond, belief. Right? You couldn't possibly ask for more.
Do you think that was like a turning point for him too, when he realized that these people were just utterly insane?
Well, sure, it was one of the turning points. But look, he fired the top 3 guys at CIA. That's unprecedented, right? But getting rid of Petraeus may be something similar. I don't think I said this on the air, and I want to say that when Obama killed Osama bin Laden, if you believe that he killed Osama bin Laden, and to me it doesn't really make any difference, he claimed to kill Osama bin Laden. Did I talk about this?
No, go ahead, shoot.
Steve and I talked about this off air.
Yeah.
That Osama bin Laden is a boogeyman, right? He's a fake. He did not conduct the September 11th attacks, and in fact, he said he didn't. But I mean, anybody who knows anything knows that the September 11th attacks were carried out by members of the Bush administration, and particularly the members of the Bush administration who had previously been in the Project for a New American Century. So, of course, given that, I mean, those two things can't occupy the same place at the same time. If Cheney's guilty, then bin Laden is innocent. But they created bin Laden, right? He was a chimera. He was a phantom. He was a mirage. He was this fake thing that they had created, and that people looked at and said, ooh, we're scared. Take all our money, take all our rights, take all our privacy, take over, have a virtual, military takeover, right? Homeland Security has the right to do anything and listen to anybody and watch anybody. Yeah, do all of that, please, because we're scared of this boogeyman that you've created, this fake boogeyman that you've created, Osama bin Laden. And Obama goes out and says, look, I killed the boogeyman. And I made the example that
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Excuse me, my throat is dry tonight. Tonight's final segment, Down the Rabbit Hole, live edition again. All week I've been off, or Monday night was taken over by the third-party debate. So it was needed time off. Anyway, excuse me, something's up my throat the past couple of days. Whew. Anyway, tonight I'm joined by Steve Stars and filmmaker John Hankey. And before I get back into things with them, I want to promote something really quick. This Sunday, coming up on Ken's show, The Information Nation, from 9 to 11 Eastern Standard here on the network, you're going to hear Joe, Ken, Ryan Brooks, and myself. We're going to be talking. We're doing a Veterans Day special, and I'm going to use my show Sunday, and Joe's going to use his show Sunday to cover veterans issues and stuff as well. And we're going to be going over things leading up to Ken's special broadcast for Sunday. So you got 6 hours of radio covering different aspects of things, maybe talking about things that, exposing things that maybe, some war crime issues, this, that, the other thing, whatever. It's a way of, actually honoring the people that have served and come forward and been truthful, or we're going to talk about veterans' health issues, just a whole plethora of things. We got 4 hours before we get to Ken's show, so make sure you tune in, starting at 5, going all the way up to 11. All right, getting back to my guest tonight, John, you had something that you wanted to talk about with JFK.
Well, yeah, I wanted to take you down a rabbit hole. Let me quickly plug, right, tell people go to Netflix and watch Dark Legacy, go to bushkilledjfk.com. There's all sorts of stuff that you can watch there.
And watch
the
Romney
rabbit hole.
Exposed.
I'm sorry?
And watch Romney Exposed.
And watch Romney Exposed on YouTube. So down the rabbit hole, this stuff is so much more complicated. The Kennedy assassination, some of it's pretty much up front and plain and simple, and people say that the CIA killed Kennedy, and that's not entirely true. That is to say, George H.W. Bush was there and very likely was shooting. E. Howard Hunt and David Morales, I think, are three CIA people that you can pin this on, and I don't know if you can pin it on anybody else in the CIA. Seriously not. But let me give you an example of that, which is the rabbit hole we're going down. Mark Lane has a couple of books that have come out lately, and I don't remember the last one. And I was going to say, because I wasn't that crazy about it, and one of the things that I object to is his blanket attacks on the CIA. And while he's blanket attacking the CIA, he attacks David Atlee Phillips, and he tells this story, which is that David Atlee Phillips was called in front of the House Assassinations Committee, and they asked about the tapes that the CIA had. Oswald allegedly went to Mexico City, and he allegedly went to the Cuban embassy, and he allegedly had called from the Cuban embassy. He called the Russian embassy, and of course the CIA had all of those phones tapped. And the House committee said, we want the tapes. You had the phones tapped, you had the tapes of the conversation, and we want the tapes. And Atlee Phillips, in front of the committee, says, well, those tapes were destroyed before the assassination. And then the committee pulls out this memo from J. Edgar Hoover discussing, to Lyndon Johnson, I presume, discussing the fact that the FBI, the day after the assassination, I think, received the tapes from the CIA of Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City, and that the tapes showed clearly that they were a fraud, that it was not Lee Harvey Oswald, it was someone impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald, but that these tapes were a fraud. Someone impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald in the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, calling the Russian embassy, and there's this conversation in there. And so now Phillips is busted, right? He was lying. The tapes weren't destroyed, and I presume they confronted him with that. Well, obviously, Mr. Phillips, you're not telling us the truth. The tapes weren't destroyed. They were provided to the FBI, who said that they were a fraud, and Phillips didn't say a word. He stood up and walked out of the room. And I would suggest, well, Mark Lane says that shows that he's guilty of something. And I say that shows that he was a cutout. That shows that he didn't. How could he have been surprised if he had been involved in this? And I think that it shows that, he was sent in to answer questions, and they didn't tell him what the questions and what the answers were. He was involved, I have no doubt, in handling Lee Harvey Oswald. And Oswald made 2 trips to Mexico City, and he was probably involved in one of them and not involved in the other one. And in the other one, so this is a fraud, but hang on. Get out your paper and pen and write this down. How is it that the CIA created this fiction that Oswald went to the Cuban embassy in Mexico City and made a phone call to the Russian embassy? They created this fiction. They sent in somebody who was a fraud. They, schooled this person and so on, and sent them in to create this phony story, right? They did that, and then they handed the tapes over to the FBI.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how do you explain that? Why would they create this fraud and this fiction and then hand over the proof of the fact that it was a fraud and a fiction, hand that over to the FBI? What sense does that make?
Creates a red herring, maybe?
What kind of a red herring?
Well, as somebody starts to look down, they look into, is this guy? It's just throwing it out there. Somebody looks, maybe they look down that road and say, is this really Oswald? Maybe they pay attention to that instead of paying attention to something else.
Well, one of the things that it shows you, if you're J. Edgar Hoover and if you're Lyndon Johnson, it shows you that the CIA was handling Oswald in the weeks before the assassination. It shows that the CIA was creating false information that linked Oswald to the Cubans and to the Russians. It shows the CIA was creating that false information, linking linking Oswald to the Cubans and the Russians in order to justify an attack upon the Russians and the Cubans because of their false involvement, right, with the Kennedy assassination. So it shows that the CIA was trying to provoke conflict between the Cubans and the Russians on the one hand and the United States on the other by creating a false association between the Russians and the Cubans and Lee Harvey Oswald and the assassinations. But it also then shows that, if they couldn't have done that, they couldn't have had that be their plan if they weren't planning to kill the president 2 weeks later. Right? So it shows the CIA involvement in the plan to assassinate John Kennedy. And the CIA made these tapes that are so insanely incriminating and handed them over to the FBI. And
that makes me think of something else that we can get into that I wanted to ask you about. And I know...
Well, I have an answer to that question.
Oh, okay. Go on then.
Sorry. But my point is that you have to be paying a lot of attention. Right? There's some very, 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 very complicated things going on here, obviously. Right? If the CIA is deliberately incriminating themselves in setting up Oswald as a patsy and trying to link him with the Cubans and the Russians, and in the assassination, if they are setting themselves up, if they're creating evidence and handing over to the FBI evidence that shows all of those things, there's something big going on. And what's big that's going on is this. There's a guy, Fabian Escalante, was the head of Cuban security at the time. And as the head of Cuban security, he was doing everything he could to infiltrate the CIA's anti-Castro groups. He was doing everything he could to infiltrate Operation 40. And he has a wealth of information detailing how all of these Operation 40 guys were in Dallas at the time, right? He has all of this information that all of these guys were in Dallas at the time. Anyway, Escalante says that the mafia paid the CIA $50 million.
That's a lot of money.
$50 million to arrange to have the United States invade Cuba and liberate Cuba for the mafia, right? To give Havana back, the casinos in Havana. Yeah, $1963. It's a very large
not in today's
money.
money, but back then that was a lot of money.
Okay, so I don't know how much time we have left, but I'm going to wrap it up.
Go ahead. We got like 15 minutes. Shoot.
Oh, all right. We got 15 minutes, but this isn't going to take 15 minutes. So I'm looking at all of this stuff, right? I've spent years looking at all of this stuff and trying to figure it out and looking at this thing. And as Escalante presents it, Escalante does not say the mafia paid the CIA $50 million to kill John Kennedy. They don't say, he doesn't say that, but I think that's very, very obviously the case if you sit back and look at it for a second. Well, how was the CIA going to achieve an invasion of Cuba? Well, they were going to, and this is the story that they're telling the mafia. They tell the mafia, look, we're going to kill John Kennedy, we're going to blame it on the Cubans, and we'll kill two birds with one stone. That is to say, you hate Kennedy, we hate Kennedy, we're going to kill Kennedy, and we're going to blame it on Castro, and we're going to get the invasion of Cuba by the U.S. military so that the mafia can go back to running their casinos and hotels in Havana. And it's going to cost you $50 million, which is a bargain under the circumstances. However, the CIA, I believe, and that is to say the Rockefellers, had decided that maybe having a full-scale nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union wasn't such a great idea. But they still needed the $50 million to kill John Kennedy, right? The Rockefellers didn't want to pay $50 million to kill John Kennedy, and like we're talking about, $50 million, $1963 is much more like $50 billion. It's much, much more like $50 billion than it is like 50 million. Anyway, so what I believe that they suckered the mafia in. They said, look, this is what we want you to pay for the assassination, and to get you to do it, we're going to tell you that it's going to end up with you coming back into power in Havana, but they're not telling the mafia, but we're gonna double cross you. And so that what you're looking at with these tapes is the double cross of the mafia. They hand these tapes over to the FBI. The FBI then is writing these memos. They call in George Bush. They call in Marita Lorenz. They call in Hemmings. I forget his first two names. Anyway, they're calling in all of these Operation 40 people and saying, we know that you were in Dallas, we know you were involved in the assassination, and we know that you're planning, and that the Cubans were, the anti-Castro Cubans, the CIA Cubans, were very loud and vociferous in the days immediately before the assassination, saying there's going to be an incident that's going to justify a U.S. invasion of Cuba. And so they were supposedly all getting ready to invade Cuba, and they were supposedly saying, well, telling their boys, the CIA is telling their mafia and Cuban exiles that you guys will then launch an invasion, and in order to defend you, Johnson will be forced to send in the Marines in order to back you guys up, right? You're going to be the spark that's going to set off the explosion that's going to force the U.S. to go in and back you up. And the FBI called in all of these people and said, don't go invading anybody because you're burnt. You know, we know that Oswald was not involved in the assassination, and we know that he wasn't connected to the Russians or the Cubans. And if you go traipsing off to do this, we will not only arrest you for invading Cuba, we'll arrest you for killing John Kennedy. Don't do it. So they shut it down so that the CIA could then tell the mafia, oops, we're sorry. Thanks for the $50 million, and thanks for helping us kill Kennedy, but we're not invading Cuba. You paid $50 million for nothing. That's the way I read it. In any case, I think that connects the dots. That explanation connects the dots, and it connects something else, which is that when Nixon came in, when Nixon finally got into office, he handed over the United States of America to the mafia. And the U.S., when Nixon got in, the U.S. was almost immediately swamped with heroin, with mafia heroin. And I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember, but I remember that if you couldn't, everybody in Los Angeles, everybody's house got robbed by heroin addicts who were, stealing anything that they could get to support their habit. I don't think that that's an exaggeration. Right? No, certainly nobody who had a stereo managed to hang on to it. And so why is it that Johnson, why did Nixon do that? Why did he hand over the streets of the United States to the mafia and let them have this free hand in dealing heroin? And if you think I'm kidding about that, I mean, I don't know to what extent people in your audience are familiar, but I mean, that's a very well documented. There's a book called The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia, but there's been any number of other exposés detailing how the caskets of soldiers being shipped home were full of heroin, and when they got here, the mafia took the heroin out. Anyway,
yeah, there's a lot of that. It's very true. Yeah. Well,
and there's a movie, Guns, Drugs, and the CIA. It's a really fascinating piece of work, and it turns out it's out there. I guess if you watch Romney Exposed, at the end it gives my email, and if you send me an email and ask me to make you a copy, I'll make you a copy of this thing. But it's a PBS. It's a Frontline special. Just crazy. You can't believe the authenticity. There was a general, right, a CIA general. His name is Tony Poe, and he's tried to stop the heroin, the involvement of all of the CIA stooges in Southeast Asia. He tried to dampen their involvement in the heroin trade, and they took him out. Because he tried to stop the heroin trade, they took him out. And he's actually the figure that Apocalypse Now, he's that guy that Marlon Brando plays, except they didn't kill him. They just fired him. But it's more dramatic if you have them kill him. Anyhow, there's all of this involvement of the CIA in assisting the mafia in bringing all this heroin in and turning over the streets of the United States to the mafia to push heroin in. And my argument is that the reason that Nixon did that, and why else, is because they owed the mafia $50 million, and that's how they got paid back. And that's why Nixon did it was in order to pay back the mafia and get them to shut up about what they knew about the involvement of Nixon and the CIA and everybody else in the assassination of John Kennedy.
You know, there's something else. There's an interesting thing that I had talked to you about off air last week, and I wanted to throw out there really quick. I had asked you about E. Howard Hunt and whether you thought that was real or not, and I believe you said you thought it was fake. Correct?
Did we do that on air?
No, it wasn't. We ended up getting into that off air. So you think
let's
E.
talk
Howard
about
Hunt's
that,
fake,
please.
right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, look, E. Howard Hunt went into the National Archives to plant forged memos that said that John Kennedy was involved in the assassination of DM. He is, I think, on that basis, he is the most professional and profound liar on the planet. He also is, and you know, Dark Legacy does a very, very good job, I think. I'll pat myself on the back a little bit, in tying him to George H.W. Bush in about 8 different ways. So he's, and he says in his confession that these guys, Sturgis and the rest of these guys, called him up and said that Sturgis and the rest of these guys, who have all admitted that they were in Dallas the day that Kennedy was shot and that they were armed and that they thought involved in the assassination. He says that they called him up and invited him to come, and he said no, he didn't want to get involved. So he knew, right, and certainly he knew Sturgis. He was very good friends with Sturgis. He knew Lorenz. He knew Hemmings. He knew all of these people. And so he knew them, and he's going to name Johnson, and he's not going to name George H.W. Bush. To me, that's...
Yeah, that's very strange.
Well,
and
let me say...
whole confession, yeah.
Well, let me say that there's all of this obvious evidence of Johnson's involvement in the assassination, but to me, none of it is absolutely persuasive. To me, it's a question mark, and I find the most powerful evidence that Johnson wasn't involved, the most powerful evidence that Johnson wasn't involved, is the fact that E. Howard Hunt names him. E. Howard Hunt, in his deathbed confession, he gives us Sturgis. We already had Sturgis. He gives us David Morales. We already had David Morales. David Morales had confessed to his drinking buddies, who then went on to talk about it, that he had been involved in the murders of both John and Robert Kennedy. So he gives us this stuff that we already had, and then he names Cord Meyer and Lyndon Johnson, and I have never found a shred of other evidence connecting Cord Meyer to the assassination. In fact, Cord Meyer is not attached to the anti-Castro Cubans and to the Operation 40 people in any way, shape, or form that I'm familiar with. If there is, I've never seen it, and certainly there's nothing in the Hunt deathbed confession to encourage me to believe any of that. He says he wasn't there, and however, his son says that he was walking down the street in New York City and he sees this photograph of the men who were arrested, the so-called tramps, who were arrested in the railroad yard behind the grassy knoll, and he said he did a cartoon double take with his eyes bugging out, saying, "That's my dad." And, you know, I look at the pictures of the men who were arrested, and it doesn't look strikingly like E. Howard Hunt to me, but, you know, he's wearing CIA makeup, so it's not that surprising to me that I wouldn't recognize him. But if his son looks at it and says, "That's my dad," to me that's the most powerful eyewitness that I'm going to accept. I mean, you understand what I'm saying, that if anybody's going to ID somebody, it's the son IDing the father that I'm going to find more powerful than anybody else's ID. So I think that absolutely everything that Hunt said, including the fact that he wasn't there, is a lie.
Yeah, you know, and he doesn't mention Bush, George H. Walker Bush, at all, which is very strange, because I heard the interview with St. John Hunt, and he was asked about that. What about George H. Walker Bush? And oddly enough, there was a kind of a silence there. Is it an insurance policy? I mean, does he really have things that he left there for the family, knowing who he was dealing with, that at some point in the future could be revealed about the Bush family? But it was so odd that he did not mention somebody who he should have mentioned, which would be, you know, Poppy Bush.
Well, to me, it's his deathbed confession is just like his attempt to get into the National Archives and plant false, incriminating memos linking Kennedy to the murder by the CIA of DM, right? That it's absolutely of a piece, that both of them are absolutely false, absolutely fraudulent, and so the deathbed confession, in my view, is, this guy is such a dedicated fraud. He's such a dedicated liar that with his dying breath, he tells a lie.
And his son did say it was said with a level of arrogance and not like, oh, I feel bad about it, but more of a level of arrogance. So maybe he was being arrogant about the fact that he was lying. That's an interesting take on it. Guys, we're out of time. John, thank you for coming on. Steve, thank you for coming on. Guys, don't hang up. I'll say goodbye to both of you off air. Ladies and gentlemen, check out John's site. Go to Netflix, Dark Legacy. Give it 5 stars. I checked it out the other night myself, the new version of it, because I'd seen his original movie. Excellent, excellent redo. We're out of time, ladies and gentlemen. We're out of